Hey buddy, watch this.
Hello, Regis Scalebane is the name, and Hearthstone is the game, and this is part 7 of my Knights of the Frozen Throne card review. This time around, I have 7 new cards up for review, including a bunch of new class cards that look pretty interesting and certainly deserve a little bit of discussion. So that said, here's how this is going to work. As always, if you're just here for the card reveals, if you just want to get my quick overall take, you can skip towards the end of the video where I'll be doing quick 5-star reviews. There's a link to that point in the description below to help you find it. But otherwise, I'll be talking about each of these cards at length near the beginning of the video, so I hope you'll stick around and listen to my detailed thoughts that give context and help explain why I'm scoring a card how I do. So all that said, let's go ahead and jump into the long format version of these reviews. Up first is a new Warlock card called the Gnomeferatu. Nice little pun there. And I wanted to put this one first because I'm pretty sure I'm going to trigger a lot of viewers and I'm going to make a lot of people mad. So I figured let's just put it right at the beginning of the video. Let's get it out of the way. This card deserves the most discussion and most explanation for why it's actually not all that strong, which a lot of people are going to think otherwise. But let me get into this and let me explain why. So Gnomeferatu is a 2-mana 2/3 card with a battle cry that says remove the top card from your opponent's deck. So a lot of people, I've read a lot of reactions to this card right off the bat. They say, oh my god, that's incredible. You're killing your opponent's cards. You're destroying all their good cards. That's fantastic. That's such a strong thing to do in Hearthstone. You're going to kill their Antonidas. You're going to break up their combo. You're going to kill their Malygos. You're going to kill all these great cards that they need. Even if you just kill the Arcane Intellect, you're killing their card draw. If you kill a minion, you're killing some awesome minion they were going to play on curve. People get really excited about the possibility to remove a card from your opponent's deck. But that's not actually doing anything in and of itself unless the matchup goes all the way to fatigue. In other words, it's a random card that you're removing. Yes, it says top card. And yes, that can give people some bias to say, that's the next card they were going to get. I killed their good card. That was a good result. But over the course of a long run of Hearthstone games, it's a random card that it's removing. Because remember, the deck is sorted randomly. So you're discarding a random card of your opponent's. Which means sometimes you're going to hit that combo piece Antonidas, and other times you're going to hit one of the other 25 cards in the game that didn't actually matter. So this has a success rate of 1 out of 25 for busting up a combo, if that's how you're thinking about utilizing this card. And frankly, every other instance, the other 24 times that it doesn't kill the Antonidas, guess what? You removed a comparatively weaker card from their deck, making them draw their Antonidas 1 turn sooner. So the one game that you win with Gnomeferatu, you help yourself lose the other 24 times, assuming you play this on turn 2 or whatever. I made up the numbers, right? But even if it's 1 out of 15, the same kind of logic applies. Because remember, it's a random card. It might as well have been the card on the bottom of their deck. You don't know which card you're discarding. And most likely, the game was going to end well before they drew every card in their deck anyway. So most likely, it could have just been a card that was buried at the bottom of the deck that was never going to get drawn anyway, and it was never going to influence the game anyway because the game ended long before then. So essentially, something like 97% of the time you play this card, it's really nothing more than just a River Crocolisk. And sure, a 2-mana 2/3 on turn 2 is fine. It's totally okay. And it actually even gives you a little bit of an informational advantage in that you can see, okay, maybe I killed a Flame Strike, maybe I killed a Sorcerer's Apprentice, maybe I killed this or that, and you can start to dictate your plays a little bit based on a card you know they only have access to 1 or maybe 0 of, which can be a small advantage as well, but it's not the kind of card that's going to be absolutely insane. Don't get caught up on this battle cry and think you're doing something really super powerful, because most of the time you're not doing anything at all. You're just taking a card out of the deck that was never going to be seen or never going to be drawn or never have mattered anyway. It's all just probabilities. It's all just numbers. It's not actually about cards. Over the course of a 50-game stretch, doesn't matter. This card did nothing. Game by game, sure. Sometimes it'll look like it did. Sometimes it'll give you some nice informational assets. But unless very specifically you're playing a deck that is designed to go to fatigue, where you actually did remove one of your opponent's resources and destroyed one of their cards and they eventually drew through everything, so you know that you've actually accomplished something and contributed to some sort of removal, only in those instances is Gnomeferatu Gnomeferatu any good. And I really don't think Warlock as a class supports that archetype very well, because Warlock is bad in fatigue. They tend to draw a lot of cards, get to fatigue sooner, don't have a lot of ways to put cards back in their deck, so I don't think like a mill-style Warlock makes any sort of sense at all. So I don't think Gnomeferatu fits there either. I think she's just a 2-mana 2/3 with a very, very, very small window to break combos, but often actually just make your opponents hit their combo much faster and much more consistently. So a risky card to run, not a tech card against combo decks, and really, at the end of the day, just a River Crocolisk, which isn't a lot. It's not terrible, it's okay, but it's not a game-changing card at all. Okay, so now that that difficult task is out of the way, let's move on to the rest of these cards. I'm going to move through these pretty quickly, starting with the Val'kyr Soulclaimer. This is a new 3-mana minion for Warrior. It's statted here a bit like an Armorsmith, but different upside, and another one of those cards that really fits into a Whirlwind, damage your own minions kind of deck. With this effect, whenever this minion survives damage, summon a 2/2 ghoul. So this is a bit like a Grim Patron, of course, with way less upside because you're not cycling patrons forever, but similar mechanic. Summoning a minion when this takes damage. A little more health than a patron, which is nice too. So this can, take 3 whirlwind effects, summoning you a max of 2/2s at its base, 3 2/2s at its base level. And if that happened, you'd have a 7/10 total stat allocation for 3 mana, which of course would be absurd. I think it's much more likely you probably get 1 ghoul out of this minion. Sometimes activated yourself, perhaps occasionally activated by your opponent too, because 4 damage is a little bit of a weird number. A lot of things deal 3. There's a couple things that deal 4, of course, True Silvers, Jade Lightnings. But if you're playing this into a board of like tokens against a deck that's more aggressive, I think there's a good chance this takes a couple hits while trading off. So you probably get 1 2/2 out of it, and then the second attack kills it, so it doesn't actually summon a second minion. So I'd say on average you're getting about 3/6 in total stats for this 3-drop, clearly spread out, but still, that's actually pretty good for a 3-drop. That's solid, and the upside here is actually rather high, so you could high roll into a couple ghouls and start to look at like a 5/8 allocation, which is really nice too. So I actually kind of like this minion, because things like Ravaging Ghoul, all the whirlwind effects that Warrior already supports, the cool Taskmaster, the new Warrior card we saw that damages a minion when it's played, all of those feed into this, and with a tempo Warrior deck, which has been sort of a niche deck that not many people have played around with or seen, but has been lingering around, tier 2, tier 3 in Hearthstone for a very long time now, this is the kind of card that would fit that really well. When you're already utilizing those whirlwind effects to successfully deal with aggressive boards from your opponent, if you can leverage that value into some extra stuff on your side thanks to a card like Val'kyr Soulclaimer, makes a lot of sense. There's also actually some potential with this card for hand buff style decks in Warrior, where you're giving it additional stats, because remember, as you increase the health total on this card, that just makes it more and more likely that it's going to summon more 2/2 ghouls for you, and makes it harder for your opponent to deal with it cleanly, so ensuring you get extra stats. So in other words, you're kind of doubling down on the value of those hand buffs, or even things like Rampage that Warrior has access to. So I think there's a couple places for this card to actually fit into, some decks that it makes sense with. I'm not saying it's going to be included in every Warrior deck. I don't think it's that good, although I do think it's a really great anti-aggro tool. It probably still has to have a deck built to support it fairly well, so not a 5-star card by any means, but still a solid inclusion and a solid little tool for Warrior to use in certain decks and in certain metas. So up next is a new minion for Hunter that I like a lot. I think this is exactly what Hunter has needed for a long time, and it's going to open up some new deck opportunities for Hunter as well. It's the Stitched Tracker, a new 3-mana minion that's a 2/2, so it looks very similar to the Howling Commander we already saw for Paladin that was revealed, which is also a 3-mana 2/2 that draws you a card, but the Stitch Tracker is considerably better in my mind because it's not just drawing you a specific kind of card from your deck, but it's actually allowing you to discover a copy of a minion from your deck, and that discover being the all-important difference because you get to pick what you want. So unlike the Howling Commander, which either you kind of just get stuck with any number of random Divine Shield minions that you might run, or you have to build your deck very specifically to suit that card. For Stitch Tracker, it could fit in just about any kind of deck. I mean, it's not going to fit in an aggressive Hunter archetype, but within the mid-range or control Hunter archetypes, whether it's an Azoth deck or just a random one that doesn't have any death rattles, just a full control deck, this is the kind of thing that would still make sense no matter what sort of package or set of cards you're running. It doesn't have to be a beast package. It doesn't have to be, could be the Death Knight Hero card package, could be Death Rattle. It doesn't matter. The Stitch Tracker still makes sense because this effect doesn't make you compromise or build your deck in a specific way. So you just get to pick whatever you need. So if you have to play this on turn 3 against aggro and you desperately need some sort of 4-drop, or maybe you're looking ahead and you need a taunt on turn 5, grab that Nesting Rock. Grab your Houndmaster to set up some kind of play. As long as you have the ability to choose, you're going to be able to fit your mana curve, fit your needs, fit your matchups. So for instance, if you're against a super control deck and you're playing a N'Zoth Hunter, Stitch Tracker means you might get to discover a copy of N'Zoth, so that you can now run 2 N'Zoths in your deck. Maybe you just need a second Highmane for all kinds of value to play something on turn 6. It doesn't really matter. This card gives you the choice, gives you the control, which I think makes it really strong. Howling Commander is close to being an okay card, just has a lot of limitations. Stitch Tracker, on the other hand, doesn't feel quite so bad. This 3-mana 2/2 stat allocation is not ideal by any means, but it's a stat we've seen work before with things like Cobalt Courier. That's been a playable card in the past. And this actually does a pretty similar thing as well. So I feel like Stitch Tracker is perfect for Hunter because they've always lacked card draw. This is card draw, pseudo card generation, so fits their needs. It's a nice little fill-in minion. 3 drops for Hunter have not been the strongest. There's always been Animal Companion, of course. Rat Pack is filled in. There's the new Bear Shark, but Stitch Tracker looks like more the choice for mid-range or control decks that have some late-game opportunities and can play a little bit slower, play a little bit more for value, because that's really what this card is all about. So I'm a big fan here of Stitch Tracker for Hunter specifically. Really nice fit for what the class is looking for, and a solid overall card too. So now let's move on to a mage card called the Ice Walker. This is a new 2-mana elemental minion. It's a 1/3, and its hero power, or its effect reads, your hero power also freezes the target. So another little hero power manipulation for mage in this expansion. Another freeze effect too in this expansion. So this is an interesting card. I can't really figure out if I think it's overpowered or really bad. I'm stuck somewhere in the middle depending on the moment and the day that you ask me. Because essentially having an on-demand freeze is really good. Freeze is a bit of an underestimated play in Hearthstone because we just haven't had that many targeted ones or that many persistent ones where you can just do it over and over again. There's cards like Glacial Shard, Frost Elemental. They've seen some value in Arena. Glacial Shard was running Rogue. It's been really frustrating in Quest Rogue when that took off. Of course, those days are gone. Those are behind us. But you've seen glimpses and hints of the potential of targeted freezes like that become really good. The problem, I think, with Ice Walker is that it's just a little bit too susceptible to removal. So in other words, most of the time you play this, you really only are going to get one targeted freeze that costs 2 mana. And that's a pretty high price to pay, because if you bundle that together and you consider this sort of one effect, you're essentially looking at a 4-mana card that's only a 1/3 that says ping, deal 1 damage to a target and also freeze it. And I don't think that's necessarily much better than Glacial Shard, right? The ping isn't all that valuable because pings are usually good if you're killing something, but if you're just chipping away 1 health total, it's not that significant. And if you're trying to freeze something, then you're not killing it, right? You're freezing it. That's where the value's at. So this looks like a way more expensive Glacial Shard that frankly doesn't have that many more stats. Gives you 1 extra little ping damage, but again, who really cares for 4 mana? So in other words, if this card dies, it's a really, really bad play. If it lives for 2, 3, 4 turns and you're able to continually utilize your hero power for a huge just a free value freeze all the time, that could be really, really good. But as this minion only has 3 health, it's going to die so easily to so many trades, so much cheap removal. You're never really going to get to use that freeze. So I think it's just a problem of keeping it on the board, keeping it alive, and actually getting able to, on demand, do that over and over again. Because you really have to scale into multiple hero powers before this one really makes sense to me. Otherwise, it's a lofty mana commitment when there are better options. I mean, plus, Glacial Shard's an elemental too, so even if you're trying to do some sort of elemental control mage deck, seems like it could still be a better fit there. So Ice Walker, I think, is pretty bad. If you could somehow keep it alive for a long time, I think it could spiral out of control and look really, really good. So if this minion had 4 health as a 1/4 for 2 mana, which I don't think would be unreasonable, by the way, I think it would be considerably stronger. If it was like a 4-cost card and had way more health, I think it'd be even better, because it'd be able to stick around for multiple turns to really give you that power. Because, you know, I think this is better in a control matchup when you're playing a ton of big minions against a ton of big minions, so you can continually stop and freeze those big minions in their tracks. So the fact that it would be a little more expensive probably wouldn't be detrimental, because you'd be okay to commit that much mana. But in like an aggro environment, this doesn't have the stats to trade, and it dies too quickly, and your hero power doesn't have time to sort of snowball, no pun intended, into extended value. So Ice Walker, I think just because of the mana cost, the stats, where it fits, it's a little off. If this card was tweaked in some different directions and this effect was applied, I think it could be really, really strong. But as it stands, I have my doubts about Ice Walker. So I guess at this moment, I'm a little down on this card. So now we'll move into some neutral cards, starting off with the Necrotic Geist. This is a new 6 mana, 5/3 minion. It's the Cult Master's uncle, I guess, because whenever one of your other minions dies, you summon a 2/2 ghoul instead of drawing a card like you might with Cult Master. But actually a similar stat line here too, just +1/+1 to Cult Master. A couple extra mana though, and frankly, I just don't think this card works very well. If you think about the kinds of decks that would tend to have a lot of small minions that could trade in, typically they're not the kinds of decks that want to trade in. They usually want to apply pressure, go to the face with Bloodlust or Savage Roar, those kinds of things. They don't always want to make value trades like that. I mean, there's been Zoo decks in the past that have kind of done that successfully, but I really don't think Necrotic Geist is going to fit them that well. If you think about this, this is almost like a Soul of the Forest that you have to keep alive for it to actually work. And Soul of the Forest doesn't even really make the cut in token decks for Druid now. This one's more expensive, much harder to utilize, much more conditional, so it feels worse in a lot of ways. It could be an okay card from time to time. Like, there's obviously plays where this could work, but I don't think it's the sort of thing you make room for in your deck. It's 6 cost, it's pretty expensive in those faster traditionally decks. So to me, Necrotic Geist just feels a little bit off. I like that it has a complex and interesting effect for a neutral card. We don't always see that, but still just feels a bit awkward, and I don't think it has a good deck fit anywhere. So not a terrible card at a fundamental level from stats or value concerns. Just not a card that seems like it'll have a home. So now let's move on to the Meat Wagon, another new neutral minion. This time a 4 mana 1/4 mech. I haven't seen a mech in a while, so that's cool. But this has a Death Rattle. Summon a minion from your deck with less attack than this minion. So this is actually a bit of a piloted shredder, right? It's a mech that's a 4-cost mech, and when it dies, you get something in return. And often it's going to be something that's rather small for total stats. So it feels a lot like piloted shredder. But of course, a 1-attack minion is a big problem in and of itself. 1/4 is just not a good stat allocation for 4 mana. You have to be able to trade more efficiently with your 4 drops. This just doesn't do that very well. So it's often just going to die without actually accomplishing anything on the board. Now that said, when it does die, there's some potential for shenanigans with this card, right? You could run Doomsayers, so that you use this as sort of a pseudo taunt / removal card, where when you kill it, you get a Doomsayer out that your opponent wasn't expecting, and maybe you do some kind of crazy cool Doomsayer clear. You know, there's Mana Tide totems for Shaman. There's low cost cards at 0 by default that could do some weird or interesting things. I can't really envision any that are that strong or that powerful that make this better than Piloted Shredder used to be, for instance, or better than any other number of 4 drops that a deck might want to run, for instance. But there is also the potential here for hand buff shenanigans again. You know, if you, or actually just on-board buffs too, either way. For instance, if you run Blessing of Kings on this guy, you could always guarantee that you summon a Ysera or a Malagos or some 4-attack minion, right? Because you put this to 5 if you built your deck in an incredibly specific way, where Ysera or Malagos were your only minions with less than 4 attack. That's an extremely convoluted example that wouldn't be the one that you actually see in the game, but a priest, if they could somehow buff a minion to the right level and do that kind of thing, or maybe a rogue with Malagos, you can start, a rogue in Cold Blood, for instance, is a good example of Malagos. You can start to see some glimmers of how this could set up some sort of combo deck where you get a really cheap or totally free Malagos and are able to utilize it for a ton of burst damage. So, in and of itself, Not a great card. I think there's a lot of fundamental problems with it. It just doesn't do enough, but it's got an extremely unique and specific effect, which means in the right hands, in the right creative minds, in the right kind of deck, it's not impossible for this card to actually contribute something meaningful. So if there's some really cool, interesting combo, some magical puzzle pieces that you can fit together to make this thing work, it's all right. It could happen. I just don't think it's very likely. And more often than not, it's just going to be a very, very bad card. So we'll see. I had hope that people are creative enough to come up with something cool, but ultimately, bad card. And then finally, we have the new 5-mana neutral dragon. It's also blue. It's like we've got Azure Drake back again, but unfortunately, I don't think the Cobalt Scalebane is nearly the card that Azure Drake was. Some people like this card that I've read some opinions of, but I'm not that excited about it. I just think it's not doing enough, but let's talk about it. It's a 5-mana 5/5 dragon. So, okay stats for 5-drop. That's totally fine. At the end of your turn, this minion will give another random friendly minion +3 attack. So that's the effect on the Cobalt Scalebane here, and I don't think it's a very good one. There's a lot of problems with giving something an attack value at the end of the turn. It's just hard to piece this together in a way that makes a lot of sense. So if you run like an aggressive deck, you got a lot of small drops, and you top off your curve with the Cobalt Scalebane instead of like a Bittertide Hydra, for instance, you are probably going to hit a minion. You're probably going to be able to keep something on the board and give it +3 attack. The problem, of course, is that it's after the turn, so you don't get to do it immediately. It's not like an Abusive Sergeant, for instance, or a Lance Carrier, or a Dark Iron Dwarf, where you get to take advantage of the attack immediately. It's very passive. It happens at the end of the turn. The other problem with that is that you then immediately pass control back to your opponent, and they get to dictate the trades and how that +3 attack is actually interacted with. So, you know, they can basically negate it, use the removal on the thing that got the attack, trade in favorable ways. So you don't really get to control how that +3 attack is ever used. And you did get a 5/5 body out of it, sure, which is solid, but 5/5 on its own certainly doesn't win you any games. So essentially, there's a bit of a control issue with this card where you just don't get to influence what gets the attack. You don't get to dictate how that attack is used, and you let your opponent actually dictate how to remove that attack. So yeah, this lived for 4 or 5 turns. It would certainly crank out a lot of value, but that also seems unlikely. For the only deck currently that we're seeing run a Dragon archetype list, which is Dragon Priest, they obviously have a much better 5-drop in Draconid Operative that's 1,000 times better than this card because it has, frankly, better stats right off the bat. So it's probably doing just as much as a body most of the time or more, and a much, much better effect than the Cobalt Scalebane. So I don't see where this card fits for any given decks. I'm not saying it's terrible on its own accords. It's okay for stats. It has a positive effect. Has the Dragon Tribal tag, so works with the Curator and all those kinds of things. But better dragons out there, better 5-drops out there for the kinds of decks that care about +3 attack, and frankly better buffs and better activations for buffs like the Dark Iron Dwarfs of the world. I'd rather run Dark Iron Dwarf than Cobalt Scalebane most of the time, I think. So a lot of problems with this card. It's okay. It's a good filler. It's nice to see a neutral 5-drop that's a dragon, that's blue, because that brings back fond memories of the Azure Drake in standard format. But this is not half the card that one is. That had incredible flexibility, card draw, spell damage, solid stats. This has very limited utility in a very, very limited number of decks, and I think there are better options out there that accomplish the same things much, much faster. So unfortunately for me, Cobalt Scalebane, just not what Azure Drake ever was. And there you go, guys. That does it for my detailed reviews here of these 7 cards. Some interesting ones, some intriguing ones, some tricky ones. So nice little set of cards. I like where the designs are going because, again, they're really complex and they feel interesting and good and unique, even for the cards that don't look good necessarily, still introducing some new things, and it feels like Blizzard is really making the game feel more complicated and putting a lot more decision-making in the player's hands and less about random effects. So now what I'd like to do is run through each of these cards very quickly and give them a rating from 1 to 5 stars to just sum up my opinion so that you guys can take screenshots down the road and make fun of me for getting the card predictions all wrong. I think that'll be funny too. So let's go ahead and jump into these quick reviews. Gnome Feratu is a 2-star card. Val'kyr Soulclaimer is a 3-star card. Stitched Tracker is a 4-star card. Ice Walker is a 2-star card. The Necrotic Geist is a 1-star card. The Meat Wagon is a 1-star card with the potential to be important someday. And the Cobalt Scalebane is a 2-star card. And there you have it. Those are my ratings. I'm sure I triggered a bunch of people, like always, with each of these ratings. So I'd love to hear your opinions on why I got it all wrong. I'm certainly not perfect. I make as many or maybe even more mistakes than most people out there reviewing cards. So share your opinions, share your take. I'm going to learn just as much as anybody else from reading all the great comments that you guys always have to leave on these reviews. But until then, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, game on.